Hello everyone, how are you doing? I hope you are all in good health and filled with happiness today. As always, we are going to dive into a devastating story that will surely stir your emotions, test your patience, and perhaps make you angry. This is the story of a wife who, despite making an enormous sacrifice, was rewarded with betrayal. Imagine for 5 long years, this wife worked tirelessly to pay for her husband's entire medical school education until the day he finally graduated. But what did she receive on his graduation day? Instead of gratitude, she was handed divorce papers. Her husband arrogantly told her, "We are no longer on the same level. I am embarrassed to have such an ordinary wife like you." After the divorce, the wife vanished without a trace. However, a year later, her ex-husband, now a successful doctor, panicked and desperately searched for her. What could have happened to him? Well, before we delve deep into this story, as always, I ask that you continue to support the channel. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the like button. And so you don't miss any of our latest and most thrilling stories, subscribe and turn on the notification bell while you wait. How about a quick roll call? We would love to know where you are watching from. Please drop your name, the city where you live, and the word present in the comments. Thank you all so much. All right, without further ado, let's dive straight into the story. That morning, thunderous applause echoed through the grand auditorium of a prestigious university in Boston. Amidst the joyful families, Natalie sat with overwhelming emotion. She discreetly wiped the corners of her eyes to keep the tears from falling. She looked at the stage. There stood her husband Jason, standing tall in his cap and gown, holding the medical degree he had just received from the dean. 5 years. 5 years of waiting, unimaginable sacrifice, and hardship had finally paid off. Natalie smiled, a genuine smile that felt a bit stiff from years of exhaustion. She looked down at her own slightly rough hands, hands that hadn't known the luxury of a manicure in the last 5 years. These hands had been busy kneading dough to bake pastries for local coffee shops at dawn and typing up freelance reports late into the night. They were the same hands that massaged Jason's back when he complained of burnout after long nights of studying. Natalie had taken on 2 jobs, sold her late mother's heirloom jewelry and suppressed all her own desires, all for a single dream to see Jason in a white coat. Beside her, Jason's mother and her mother-in-law, Sylvia, wore the proudest expression of all. "My Jason is finally a great doctor," Sylvia exclaimed to a guest sitting next to her, eagerly soaking up the congratulations. Sylvia looked incredibly elegant, wearing a designer suit and an impeccable updo. She cast a sideways glance at Natalie, who was wearing a simple off-the-rack dress. For a long time, Sylvia hadn't hidden her dislike for Natalie, as Natalie came from a humble family and, in Sylvia's eyes, wasn't remotely good enough for her brilliant Jason. But Natalie didn't care. Jason's love was enough for her. The graduation ceremony concluded. Jason walked toward them with a wide smile, but that smile was directed primarily at his mother. He hugged Sylvia tightly. "I did it, Mom," he said. "Of course you did, sweetheart. I always knew you were exceptional," Sylvia replied, patting his back. Natalie stepped forward to hug her husband. "Congratulations, honey." Jason accepted Natalie's embrace with a noticeable stiffness. He quickly pulled away. "Yeah, thanks. Tonight we're having dinner at that upscale new restaurant they just opened in the Seaport district. I made a reservation. Let's celebrate," Jason said. But his eyes didn't meet Natalie's bright gaze. Natalie's heart stung a little at his coldness, but she tried to understand. Maybe Jason was just exhausted or simply overwhelmed by the emotion of the day. "Of course, honey, whatever you want," she replied softly. That evening, the 3 of them sat in a luxury restaurant overlooking the dazzling Boston skyline. Natalie felt a bit out of place. It was the most expensive establishment she had ever set foot in. She watched Jason, who had changed into an expensive-looking designer shirt, sitting with overflowing confidence. Sylvia couldn't stop taking pictures of Jason to post on her social media. "Honey, all our hard work has finally paid off. Now we can start a new life," Natalie said, trying to spark a warm conversation. Hearing this, Sylvia let out a little scoff. "Jason's hard work. You mean Natalie? My son is a highly driven man, and now he is a doctor. Of course, his life will be new. He deserves the best." Natalie fell silent at the sarcastic remark. She waited for her husband to defend her, to say that it had been a joint effort, but Jason said nothing, keeping himself busy examining the menu. After ordering their food, a brief silence fell over the table. Jason cleared his throat and looked at Natalie. This time his gaze was hard to read, cold, expressionless, with something strangely detached about it. "Natalie, I have to tell you something," Jason said. "Yes, honey," Natalie responded, looking at him expectantly. Jason reached into his sleek new briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it on the table right in front of her. Natalie frowned. "What is this, honey, a job offer from the hospital?" Sylvia, sitting next to Jason, smirked with sheer smugness. That smile gave Natalie a sudden sinking feeling in her stomach. Jason shook his head slightly. "Open it." Natalie's hands trembled a little as she picked up the envelope. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the first few lines of the official document. Her heart seemed to stop. The luxurious revolving restaurant felt like it had ceased spinning. The clinking of silverware from other tables seemed to fade into a vacuum. Clearly written on the pages was a petition for divorce. Natalie looked up at Jason in sheer disbelief. Her lips trembled. "Jason, this is a joke, right? What kind of prank is this? Today is your graduation." Jason sighed deeply. His face hardened. It was as if the mask of happiness he had worn all day had completely fallen off. "I'm serious, Natalie. We can't be together anymore." "But why? What did I do wrong, honey? For 5 years," Natalie's voice cracked. "Exactly for that reason," Jason interrupted sharply. 5 years was enough. I am a doctor now. I have a brilliant future ahead of me. I need a partner who is on my level, someone I can take to important galas, someone who fits my social status." Jason looked her up and down, evaluating her simple dress and her tired, makeup-free face. "Natalie, we are no longer on the same level." He delivered that sentence with such lightness, as if Natalie's 5 years of grueling sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. "I am embarrassed to have such an ordinary wife like you." It was like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. Natalie's head spun. Those insulting words were spoken by the very man for whom she had been the sole provider, the nurse, and the pillar for his dreams. Sylvia chimed in with a triumphant voice. "Did you hear that Natalie? Jason has different standards now. You should have realized your place from the beginning. It's best if you separate now before you become a burden and embarrass him in front of the medical community. Consider the money you made a charitable donation." The tears Natalie had been holding back finally broke free. Not just a single drop, but an uncontrollable torrent. The pain, the humiliation, and the sheer betrayal shattered her heart. She looked at Jason, searching for any trace of the man who had once loved her, but all she found was an arrogant stranger. She looked at Sylvia, who was smiling with absolute satisfaction. Natalie bit her lip hard to suppress a sob fighting to escape. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break down in public. With violently shaking hands, she crumpled the divorce papers. The word charitable that Sylvia had spat out acted like gasoline poured over the glowing embers of Natalie's heart. Something inside her snapped, but it didn't shatter. The moment it snapped, it transformed into cold, sharp steel. Her tears stopped instantly. She slowly raised her head and looked at the two people across from her. Her gaze, previously dazed and full of pain, was now icy, expressionless, and unreadable. She roughly wiped away the remaining tears on her cheeks. It was no longer the gentle gesture of a desperate person, but the firm motion of someone who had just made a definitive decision. Jason and Sylvia were taken aback by the sudden shift. They had expected Natalie to cry, beg, or cause a hysterical scene, but instead, Natalie maintained a terrifying silence. Enough. That single word slipped from Natalie's lips. Her voice was slightly hoarse from holding back her crying, but it was incredibly strong and emphatic. "Sylvia, I said enough," Natalie repeated, now looking directly into her mother-in-law's eyes, causing the older woman to look visibly unnerved. "You told me to know my place. You said my sacrifices were just charity. You said I was a burden." Natalie let out a short laugh, a cynical laugh far more chilling than any hysterical crying. That laugh made Jason shift uncomfortably. "Did you really think I would just sit back with my arms crossed while you stepped all over me and humiliated me like this?" Natalie turned to Jason, who now looked tense and bewildered. "And you, Dr. Jason." The way she emphasized doctor sounded like pure mockery. "You say you've become a doctor. You say that diploma is yours. You are gravely mistaken." Natalie slowly stood up from her chair. Her movements were calm but loaded with a contained fury. Her hand, the same one that had just crumpled the divorce papers, now pointed directly at Jason's face, which was beginning to pale. "That diploma is mine too." Natalie's voice suddenly rose an octave. It startled Jason and Sylvia, and even caused the patrons at the adjacent table to turn and look. Natalie didn't care. "Every single dollar that got you to that graduation stage is my sweat," Natalie yelled, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Every thick textbook you bought was food I took out of my mouth. Every night you slept comfortably. Before an exam, I was awake until dawn, baking for my morning orders. You, Natalie, poked Jason's chest with her index finger. You merely borrowed my body, my energy, and my entire life for the last 5 years to buy that degree. Her chest heaved, her breath catching as she contained the anger boiling to the top of her head. You said I'm not on your level. Natalie laughed again, this time louder. You're right. I truly am not on your level. She shifted her piercing gaze between Jason and Sylvia. I will never be on the level of a coward who betrays his wife on the day of his graduation. And I will never be on the level of a mother who proudly supports her son's betrayal just for social status. Natalie grabbed her simple shoulder bag from the chair. And remember this, both of you, Natalie emphasized every word, you will regret this. Wounded in his pride as a newly minted doctor and furious at being scolded in public, Jason stood up. His face was red with shame and anger. Natalie, sit down. Don't make a scene. What else do you want, huh? Alimony, division of assets. We don't have anything. Did you forget all your money went to my tuition? Jason yelled, trying to intimidate Natalie into sitting back down. But Natalie merely smiled. A smile so cold it sent a shiver down Jason's spine. Did you really think I was that stupid, honey? Natalie pulled out her cell phone. She no longer cared about the stares of the people around them. Did you think I hadn't noticed your disgusting behavior 6 months ago? You started hiding your phone whenever I walked by. You started coming home late with the excuse of study groups, even though your clothes smelled like another woman's perfume. A week ago, I gave up buying new winter clothes to cover the last installment of your tuition, and suddenly you had the cash for a brand new designer watch. Jason's jaw dropped. He had no idea Natalie had noticed any of it. Natalie dialed a speed dial number on her phone. Attorney Gallagher. Hello. I'm sorry to bother you at this hour. Jason frowned. Attorney Gallagher? Who is Attorney Gallagher? He asked suspiciously. Sylvia, who had been so arrogant earlier, now looked incredibly anxious. Her face grew tight. Natalie completely ignored Jason as if the man wasn't even there. Yes, it's Natalie. Our suspicions were correct. For a moment, Natalie listened to the voice on the other end of the line. Yes, Mr. Gallagher. I received the petition tonight, just as expected, exactly like the scenario you predicted. Jason's heart pounded. Suspicions. Predicted. Please proceed, Natalie continued. Her voice was frighteningly calm. Immediately file all the documents I left at your office last week. Yes, Mr. Gallagher. Everything, including the countersuit for adultery and marital fraud. And most importantly, include the complete itemized claim for restitution of educational expenses and living support over the last 5 years. Please send the summons to the hospital address where he starts his residency next week as soon as possible. Hearing the word restitution, Sylvia jumped up from her chair. Her face was ghost white. Countersuit. What restitution, Natalie? Don't make things up. Are you crazy? Are you trying to blackmail my son? She screamed in panic. Natalie finally hung up the phone, sliding it into her bag with a slow, deliberate motion. She looked at Sylvia. I'm not crazy, ma'am. I'm simply claiming my rights. You just said yourself that this was a charitable donation, an investment. Well, I want my investment back. All of it. I have kept every single bank transfer receipt, the tuition invoices, and even every electric bill I paid over the last 5 years. Natalie turned to Jason, who was now paralyzed. His lips were pressed tightly together. Did you really think I'd let you walk away freely to find a new life and a new wife on your level, with the diploma I bought with my blood and tears? You were dead wrong, honey. Natalie picked up the crumpled divorce petition on the table in front of Jason and Sylvia. She didn't tear it up. Instead, she smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her bag. This will be excellent additional evidence in court. Thank you. I will not sign your divorce papers, Natalie said firmly. But I will divorce you, and I will make you pay back every single drop of my sweat before you can proudly show off that white coat. Without another word, Natalie turned around and walked out of that luxury restaurant with a steady stride, leaving Jason and Sylvia frozen at the table, sitting in front of the expensive food they had ordered and hadn't even touched. That night, Natalie didn't cry anymore. The burning fury had dried up all her tears, leaving behind only an iron determination. Her footsteps as she left the restaurant were light, but her footprints felt like they were burning into the cold marble floor. She hailed a passing taxi and gave the address of Megan's studio apartment, her only real friend in the city. During the ride, Natalie sat perfectly still. The city lights, which should have been witnesses to her happy celebration, now felt like a painful mockery. The arrogant face of Jason and the cunning smirk of Sylvia kept flashing before her eyes. We are no longer on the same level. That sentence kept echoing in her ears like a rusty nail. She gripped her phone tightly. She wasn't going to let this humiliation be the end of everything. It would be the beginning. Megan opened the door to her modest apartment looking sleepy, but her eyes widened in shock seeing Natalie at her door. "Natalie, what are you doing here at this hour? Shouldn't you be celebrating Jason's graduation?" Natalie didn't answer. She stepped inside, and as soon as the door closed, her legs gave out. She leaned heavily against the wall. "He asked for a divorce," Natalie said with a quiet, raspy voice. What Megan jumped in shock. "That's a joke. It can't be." At the restaurant on the very night of his graduation, Natalie repeated, her voice beginning to tremble again. Megan hugged her friend instantly. In Megan's arms, Natalie's armor finally crumbled, but it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of boiling fury. She told her everything. Sylvia's insults, Jason's arrogance, and the divorce papers. That ungrateful parasite, Megan cursed, clenching her fists. "And that mother-in-law, is she a person or a demon? I told you from the very beginning, Natalie. They were just using you." "I know." Natalie pulled away from the hug and wiped her tears. "I already called a lawyer. Attorney Gallagher." Megan was stunned. "A lawyer? Since when?" "For 6 months." Natalie paused. "Ever since I noticed Jason was starting to change. Ever since I found proof he was transferring money to another account behind my back. I just needed the final piece of evidence. And tonight he handed it to me." A few weeks later, the atmosphere in the mediation room at the family court was icy and tense. Natalie, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, sat up perfectly straight. Her face was calm and expressionless. Next to her, Attorney Gallagher, a middle-aged man with a quiet but sharp demeanor, arranged a thick file folder on the table. Across from them, Jason and Sylvia sat nervously. Jason, who was about to begin his residency at a prestigious hospital, looked haggard. Sylvia kept whispering in his ear, her face pale. Attorney Gallagher's summons, which detailed the countersuit and a claim for financial restitution amounting to $485,000, had completely ruined their celebratory mood. The mediator initiated the session, but before Jason or his newly hired lawyer could speak, Attorney Gallagher intervened directly. "Thank you for your time. My client, Miss Natalie, is here today to respond to Mr. Jason's petition for divorce. However, we are rejecting that petition." Jason looked up sharply. "What do you mean you reject it, Natalie?" We reject it," Attorney Gallagher interrupted firmly, "because it will be my client who files the petition for divorce, and we have already registered it." Gallagher handed a stack of papers to the mediator. "A petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, financial fraud, and psychological abuse." "That is slander," Sylvia shrieked, her voice shrill. "Don't make things up." Attorney Gallagher ignored her. "And we are also attaching a claim for restitution for all educational and living expenses my client shouldered over 5 years to finance Mr. Jason's medical studies." Attorney Gallagher opened the thick dossier in front of him. Attached is all the detailed evidence from the biannual tuition transfers, receipts for textbooks and clinical supplies, proof of rent payments, down to a breakdown of the daily grocery expenses my client transferred to Mr. Jason's account. The total amounts to $485,000. Jason's jaw dropped and the color drained from his face instantly. $485,000 was an astronomical sum. His starting salary as a surgical resident wouldn't even cover a tenth of that in a year. Sylvia gasped for air. The lawyer they had hired could only swallow hard upon seeing the impeccable stack of evidence. This is blackmail," Jason said, his voice a mix of anger and terror. That was the duty of a wife." "Natalie, are you insane?" Natalie, who had remained silent this entire time, finally spoke. She looked directly at Jason. "The duty of a wife who you said wasn't on your level. The duty of a wife you were embarrassed of. The duty of a wife you abandoned on your graduation day," Natalie asked, her voice flat but razor sharp. "I'm not insane, Jason. I'm just collecting what is mine." A suffocating silence filled the room. Jason and Sylvia knew they couldn't mount any defense against that stack of evidence. It was then that Natalie gave a small nod to Attorney Gallagher. The lawyer nodded back. His next words put Jason and Sylvia completely on edge. "My client is a person with a big heart. She does not wish to drag this matter out." Natalie looked at Jason. "She will withdraw the $485,000 restitution claim." Jason and Sylvia opened their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. On a few conditions, Natalie added quickly. "First, you will accept my at-fault divorce petition. The cause must be clearly registered on record adultery and abandonment. I want my honor intact." Jason gritted his teeth. That was deeply humiliating. Second, Natalie continued, there will be no claim of assets. I won't take anything from that apartment, and you can never demand anything from me. Ever. We walk away clean. Third, you both sign an agreement that you will never bother me or my family ever again. Fourth, this ends today. No appeals, no delays. Jason looked at Sylvia. Sylvia, utterly terrified at the prospect of having to sell her house to help pay a $485,000 debt, nodded frantically in a panic. Agree, sign it quickly, she whispered. Pride was nothing compared to a debt that massive. With hands shaking from a mixture of shame and relief, Jason signed the agreement. The divorce process was swift. The judge's gavel fell. Natalie was officially free. She walked out of the courthouse without looking back, leaving behind a completely deflated Jason and a weeping Sylvia. That afternoon, Natalie finished packing her last few belongings into an old suitcase in Megan's apartment. She had sold the rest of her jewelry and gathered enough cash to start a new life. Natalie, that $485,000 was yours. You could have bought a new condo with that money, Megan said, still struggling to understand. Natalie zipped the suitcase closed. I don't want it, Megan. If I accept that money, I'll always be tied to the resentment. It's dirty money stained with humiliation. I consider that I paid $485,000 for a very expensive life lesson, and I don't intend to repeat it. So where will you go? Natalie smiled. It was the first truly genuine smile in weeks. I want to continue with my dream, the one I put on hold. I want to go back to college. I want to write. I still have a brain, Megan. I still have ambition. Natalie grabbed Megan by the shoulders. I promise you, I'm leaving this city, disappearing from Jason and his mother's lives. I will use all my immaterial capital, all this pain, to build something truly great. One day they will hear my name again, and then they'll realize who exactly wasn't up to their level. Natalie hugged Megan tightly. Take care, Megan, and don't tell anyone where I am. Of course, Natalie. Chase your dreams. Make them regret it. That night, Natalie headed to the Greyhound bus station. She deliberately chose a distant, quiet town in upstate New York, a place where no one knew her. As the bus began to leave behind the dazzling city that had caused her so much pain, Natalie looked out the window. She didn't cry. She only felt immense relief. She vanished with one suitcase, a pile of uncollected sacrifices, and a massive promise to herself. 1 year had passed. Time flowed uncompromisingly, shifting destinies and turning the wheel of life. On the 15th floor of the most prestigious private hospital in Boston, a young man walked with a firm, confident stride. His white doctor's coat was impeccably ironed. An expensive stethoscope hung around his neck, not just as a tool but as a status symbol. The badge on his chest clearly read, Dr. Jason. He was the new ace of surgery, intelligent, agile, and despite his young age, already entrusted with several complex operations. His superiors adored him, the young nurses admired him, and his peers viewed him as a role model. Jason had achieved everything he wanted. His old life with Natalie felt like a distant nightmare. He barely even remembered his ex-wife's name. If it ever crossed his mind, Jason just considered it a shameful memory, a stepping stone he had to step on to get to where he was now. Divorcing Natalie was the best decision of my life, he would frequently tell himself in front of the mirror in his luxurious seaport penthouse. Natalie was a burden, a pebble in his shoe, a reminder of his mediocre past. Now he was free, and he celebrated that freedom with luxury. Jason no longer lived in the small rented apartment he had shared with Natalie. He and Sylvia had moved into a sprawling penthouse with panoramic views of the city. Sure, the mortgage was suffocating him, but Jason didn't care. Status was everything. He also traded his old car for a brand new jet black Mercedes S-Class. He financed it on a 7-year loan with absurdly high interest rates. His starting salary at the private hospital was high, but nowhere near enough for the lifestyle he wanted to project. Every weekend, Jason spent his evenings dining at the kind of Michelin star restaurants he had used to humiliate Natalie. He bought designer watches, custom suits, and joined an exclusive golf club. On the surface, Jason was the perfect picture of success, but behind that facade, a mountain of credit card bills was beginning to pile up. He lived by juggling 5 different credit cards and had taken out several personal bank loans under the guise of remodeling the penthouse. Jason's arrogance had perfectly rubbed off on Sylvia. Her status as the mother of a successful surgeon had elevated her social standing to a level she had never imagined. Sylvia was now a full-fledged member of a country club circle, rubbing elbows with the wives of businessmen and executives. Whenever they gathered, she spoke of nothing but Jason's greatness. "Oh, Jason, of course, darling. He's constantly in high-stakes surgeries. Last night, he didn't get home until 3 a.m., she would boast one afternoon while stirring expensive tea at a luxury hotel lobby. In reality, she knew perfectly well Jason had arrived at 3 a.m., not because of surgery, but because he had been partying at an exclusive VIP club. Poor me, what can you do? It's the calling of a noble profession. That boy is just so dedicated. A new penthouse, you say, Sylvia continued, pretending to answer a question. Oh well, it's modest. 3 bedrooms overlooking the harbor. Jason insisted his mother move in. He said, I need to be comfortable in my golden years. He is such a good son. Sylvia constantly pressured Jason to find a new partner quickly. Remember, marriage is a social investment now for your career, she would lecture him. Look for someone on your level. Dr. Higgins's daughter is gorgeous and studied in Switzerland. Or what about Madison, the hospital director's daughter? Jason simply nodded, enjoying his new status as the city's most eligible bachelor. The days blurred into a cycle of ostentation and mounting debts, until one afternoon while Jason was leading an evaluation meeting with junior residents, something happened. He was speaking with authority, pointing at the presentation screen, when suddenly he felt a wave of dizziness. His vision blurred for a split second, and he had to grip the edge of the conference table to keep from stumbling. Dr. Jason, are you all right? Asked a junior resident, noticing his superior's face had suddenly gone pale. Jason straightened up instantly. He cleared his throat. I'm fine, just a little fatigued. Too many back-to-back surgeries, he replied sharply. Let's continue. He ignored the strange, intense throbbing at his temples. Must be a common migraine, he thought. Lack of sleep and too much espresso. But that common migraine began appearing more frequently. A few days later, while eating lunch in the hospital cafeteria, still maintaining his arrogant attitude, criticizing the chef's food for not being up to standard, his hand holding a spoon suddenly trembled slightly. The tremor only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. What is this, he thought to himself. He clenched his fist under the table, trying to control the shaking. He blamed the air conditioning for being set too low. That night in his luxury penthouse, the symptom manifested with terrifying force. He had just taken a hot shower and was getting ready for a dinner Sylvia had arranged to introduce him to a woman. He stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting an expensive tie. Suddenly, the room seemed to tilt. His head throbbed intensely as if thousands of needles were piercing his skull. His vision blurred completely, and a loud ringing echoed in his ears. He stumbled backward, crashing into the vanity behind him. Expensive bottles of cologne shattered on the floor. What's happening? Jason whispered, gripping his head, which felt ready to explode. He collapsed to the floor. He couldn't catch his breath. A cold sweat soaked his face and shirt. As a doctor, all the danger alarms blared in his head. This wasn't normal fatigue. It wasn't a migraine, but his massive ego refused to admit it. He couldn't be sick. The great Dr. Jason, at the peak of his career, could not be sick. He crawled to the medicine cabinet, grabbed 2 high-dose painkillers, and swallowed them dry. 15 minutes later, the pain slowly subsided. He still felt a residual throb, but he looked at himself in the broken mirror shards on the floor. His face was ashen. His phone rang. It was Sylvia. Jason, where are you? Madison and her family are waiting. Don't embarrass your mother. Jason took a deep breath, trying to gather what little strength he had left. Yes, Mom, I'm on my way. Bad traffic, he lied. He stood up. His body still trembled slightly. He washed his face and fixed his hair. He looked over at the stack of credit card bills and the Mercedes loan statements sitting on his desk. Suddenly, all that luxury felt cold and terrifying. Fear began to invade his mind, but he forcefully pushed it away. I'm fine, he muttered. I just need to rest. Then everything will go back to normal. He grabbed the keys to his Mercedes and walked out, his mask of success and arrogance firmly back in place. But the mask of arrogance Jason had worn for an entire year finally cracked and shattered completely. A few days after suffering that severe dizzy spell in his penthouse, the symptom reappeared in the absolute worst place imaginable, at the operating table. He was leading a routine appendectomy, a procedure he could do with his eyes closed. He had scrubbed in, put on his sterile gloves, and was about to ask the scrub nurse for the scalpel. Suddenly, his right hand trembled. At first, it was a subtle shake, but within seconds, it turned into a severe, uncontrollable tremor. The scalpel he had just received nearly slipped from his grip. Doctor, his assistant, asked cautiously from behind his surgical mask. His eyes showed pure bewilderment. Time seemed to freeze in that sterile room. Jason stared at his own hand, stunned. He couldn't stop it. Cold sweat the size of corn kernels began to drench his temples. Jason tried to make an excuse. The size of this glove is wrong. Swap it, he whispered. But when he tried to pull the glove off, the tremor became even more glaringly obvious. The assistant and the nurses exchanged alarmed glances. Jason, the star surgeon, known for his rock-steady hands, was shaking like a leaf in the dead of winter. "Dr. Jason, are you sure you're all right?" the assistant asked again. Now there was undeniable concern in his voice. "I said I'm fine," Jason snapped, but he knew he couldn't continue. "Take over," he ordered his assistant with a strained voice. "I suddenly feel ill, acid reflux." He tossed the scalpel onto the instrument tray and rushed out of the OR, leaving a massive question mark hanging over his entire surgical team. He ripped off his mask and surgical cap in the hallway and leaned heavily against the wall. He couldn't breathe. This was no longer fatigue. It wasn't a migraine. It was something that was going to destroy his career, his pride, his entire future. Everything depended on the steadiness of that hand, and that hand had just betrayed him. That night, Jason arranged a secret meeting well after consultation hours. He swallowed all his pride and headed to the office of the chief of neurology, Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson was a veteran doctor, calm, brilliant, and deeply dedicated. The kind of doctor Jason usually considered old school and unstylish. Ironically, Jason's fate now rested entirely in Dr. Peterson's hands. "Dr. Jason, what seems to be the problem?" asked Dr. Peterson, looking calmly at Jason, who had slipped into the office like a thief. Jason had left his white coat in the car. He had come simply as a patient. "I've been experiencing strange symptoms. My hands shake and my vision blurs frequently." Dr. Peterson listened intently. His face remained calm. He performed a series of basic neurological tests on Jason. "Lie down there. Follow this light. Close your eyes. Relax." Every command was like a slap to Jason's ego. The great surgeon was now an obedient, terrified patient. After the physical exam, Dr. Peterson looked at him seriously. "We need to get an MRI of your brain and spinal cord first thing in the morning." The very next day, Jason underwent the scans with a mix of dread and denial. He waited for the results in his own office, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. Sylvia called him several times, complaining about why Jason hadn't taken her to the country club luncheon. "What's the point of my life if my successful doctor's son doesn't show me off?" "Jason, I'm busy, Mom," Jason yelled and hung up. His phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Peterson. The results were ready. "Jason, can you come to my office right now?" Jason's heart sank. With heavy footsteps, he walked to Dr. Peterson's office. The veteran doctor was already waiting. On the large computer monitor behind his desk, Jason's MRI scans were displayed. Dr. Peterson didn't beat around the bush. "Jason, sit down." Dr. Peterson pointed at the screen. "Look at this." He pointed to several abnormal white lesions on Jason's spinal cord and optic nerve. "This isn't a tumor, nor is it a stroke." "Then what is it?" Jason whispered, his voice shaking. "It is a rare, highly aggressive autoimmune disease. The treatment we have here will only slow the progression, Jason. It will neither stop nor reverse the damage that has already occurred. Given that your profession is surgery, we need a radical solution." What's the solution? Tell me." "A hematopoietic stem cell transplant, HSCT, to reboot your entire immune system. It is your only hope of ever holding a scalpel again." A tiny spark of hope ignited in Jason. "Okay, let's do it. When can we schedule it?" Dr. Peterson sighed deeply. "This is the hardest part. That specific procedure isn't approved or available here in the US for this specific autoimmune condition. It has to be done overseas at specialized clinics in Singapore or Germany." Jason's heart pounded. "The cost. How much does it cost?" Dr. Peterson looked at Jason with deep compassion. "The rough estimate for the entire procedure, the medical stay, and the initial recovery is about $1.5 million. $1.5 million. That number hit Jason in the solar plexus like an invisible sledgehammer. The wind was knocked out of him. $1.5 million. He didn't even have $15,000 in his checking account. His entire salary went to paying the installments on the Mercedes, the mortgage on the luxury penthouse, Sylvia's credit cards, and maintaining his fake lifestyle. "What about my insurance?" Jason whispered, praying for a miracle. Dr. Peterson opened another file. "Hospital insurance policies only cover registered major illnesses. Yours falls under rare, and HSCT for autoimmune diseases is still considered experimental by most U.S. insurance providers. Maximum coverage will be for the diagnostic expenses and initial treatment here, maybe around $150,000. No, Jason shook his head. Impossible. It can't be 1.5 million. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound that resembled a sob. Doctor, Jason, the ace of surgery, who had insulted his wife for not being on his level, was now sitting here completely broke, handed a diagnosis of a rare disease that threatened to leave him blind and paralyzed. Jason stumbled out of Dr. Peterson's office and made his way home to his penthouse. Sylvia was watching television in the lavish living room. Jason, you're finally home. I ordered some expensive takeout on your credit card. Let's eat. Jason stared at his mother with dead eyes. I'm sick, Mom, he whispered. With what a cold I told you to. It's not a cold, Jason screamed, his voice exploding. I am critically ill. I need a surgery overseas. It costs $1.5 million. The spoon Sylvia was holding clattered onto her expensive porcelain plate. $1.5 million. That's a joke, Jason. Where would we get that kind of money? We just paid the down payment on your new car. It's not a joke, Mom, Jason yelled, the panic finally overtaking him completely. He could go blind. He could end up paralyzed. My career is over and we have no money. We have nothing. We are ruined, Mom. Ruined. That night, inside the luxury penthouse with decades of mortgage payments left on it, the arrogant Dr. Jason finally cried like a child. Not because of his illness, but from the crushing realization that he didn't have a single dollar to save his life and his pride. Panic turned the room into a silent tomb. Jason and Sylvia were now trapped in it. Jason's scream of, "We are ruined," echoed through the walls of imported marble, and the expensive, unpaid furniture hitting them with a deafening silence. Sylvia, her face pale, was the first to break it, but not with a wail of compassion for her son. No, it can't be, Sylvia whispered shakily. She didn't look at Jason, who was sitting limp on the floor. She looked around at the expensive abstract painting on the wall, the crystal chandelier, the 80-inch flat-screen TV. We can't be ruined, Jason. This penthouse, your car, my designer bags, all of this. Jason laughed, a dry, rattling sound. That's the problem, Mom. All of this is an illusion. He stood up and kicked the glass coffee table in front of him, sending it scraping across the floor. This penthouse is a 20-year mortgage, Mom. We've barely made 10 payments. Its market value now is far less than what we owe the bank. If we sell it, we'll still owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the Mercedes you bragged about to your social circle, it's a 7-year loan. The interest is drowning us. If we sell it today, we won't have enough to cover the remaining debt. We have nothing but debt. Debt everywhere. Sylvia gasped, thinking of the designer bags she had hoarded in her closet. Her heart shrank. Almost half of them were high-quality knockoffs she had bought just to keep up appearances in her country club circle, without having to constantly swipe Jason's cards. They were truly living a lie. Then what do we do? 1.5 million. Sylvia collapsed onto the expensive sofa. My friends. The women from the club. Mrs. Higgins, the bank director's wife. Mrs. Dalton, the construction mogul's wife. I'm sure they can help. They won't let their dear friend suffer. That vain hope flared for a moment. With trembling hands, Sylvia grabbed her phone and dialed Mrs. Higgins. A cheerful voice answered. Hello, Sylvia. What's going on at this hour? Darling, please help me. Help me. Sylvia broke into hysterical sobs instantly. It's Jason. Jason is very sick, darling. He needs a surgery that costs 1.5 million. Please, darling, can you loan me some money? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and that cheerful tone vanished instantly. 1.5 million. My God, Sylvia, that's way too much. Look, I'm sorry, Sylvia. My husband is in an important overseas meeting and I can't bother him. And I am incredibly busy planning a charity gala. I'll call you later. Bye. Click. Sylvia was stunned. She tried calling back. Busy. She dialed Mrs. Dalton. The call was rejected. She dialed again. Rejected again. She called Mrs. Gomez. The answer was identical. Oh, Sylvia, we actually need funds for a massive remodel right now. It's a bad time. All the socialite friends who had praised her now avoided her like the plague. Sylvia threw her phone onto the sofa. They're all liars. They're awful people. Jason looked at his mother in disgust. Now, do you realize they're only your friends when you have something to show off, just like my friends, Jason realized. Now it was his turn. He couldn't rely on his mother. He had to act. but his pride as a top-tier doctor forbade him from begging outright. He tried calling a few fellow doctors he considered close friends. "Hey Brian, sorry to bother you so late." Jason called his surgeon colleague Brian Foster. "Dr. Jason, what's up, man? What's going on?" Jason swallowed hard. "Look, Brian, I came across a really good overseas real estate investment opportunity. I need liquidity urgently, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. Do you have anything you can front me?" A chuckle came from the other end. "Wow, Dr. Jason is playing in the big leagues now. I'll pass, man. With your new Mercedes and that penthouse, you're much better at making money than I am. Sorry, dude. I just paid the down payment on my kid's house, so I'm completely broke. Good luck with the investment, though." Click. Jason let out a muffled groan. Everyone thought he was rich. What cruel irony. The arrogance he had built up over the past year had turned into a boomerang that now prevented him from getting any help. He tried calling 2 other doctors. The responses were identical. "Sorry, doc. Don't have the cash right now." Desperate Jason swallowed the very last shred of his pride. He scheduled a meeting with the hospital director. He had to confess his illness. Maybe the hospital could grant an emergency loan to their star employee. In the director's chilly office, Jason explained his situation without theatrics, sticking only to the medical facts. The director listened with profound sympathy. "Dr. Jason, I am so sorry. This is incredibly shocking news. Of course, we will help you maximize your insurance benefits. But director, the insurance only covers $150,000. I need $1.5 million. Couldn't the hospital grant me a loan? I don't care if you garnish my salary for the next 10 or 20 years, Jason pleaded. His arrogant attitude was completely gone. The director slowly shook his head. "Dr. Jason, we are a medical institution, not a bank. We cannot allocate such a massive sum for a personal loan to an employee, not even to you. Our regulations are strict. The most we can do is support you with the $150,000 via insurance. For the rest, I suggest you try liquidating your personal assets, your car, your penthouse." The blow hit harder than Dr. Peterson's diagnosis. Assets. Again with the assets. Jason walked out of the director's office on trembling legs. He was officially at a dead end. No friends, no colleagues, no institutions, no assets. He was entirely alone. The following days were pure hell. Jason was forced to take an emergency medical leave. The hospital administration approved it rapidly, almost too rapidly, as if they were relieved to be rid of a surgeon with malfunctioning hands. The rumors spread like wildfire. Jason locked himself in his office, rejecting all calls. His pride was in tatters. He knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. His symptoms were worsening. That morning he woke up and the edge of his left visual field was slightly blurry, as if a thin veil covered it. The disease wasn't waiting. He sat in the living room of his dark, luxurious penthouse. The thick curtains were drawn tight. Sylvia was locked in her room, crying or sleeping. Jason didn't care. He stared at his phone. His contact list was so full, yet he felt so empty. He started deleting names. Mrs. Dalton blocked. Brian Foster kiss-ass deleted. Madison Golddigger deleted. He erased dozens of names. The screen now only held essential contacts, distant relatives from his hometown who had no money anyway. And then his finger stopped on M. Megan. The name sat there. Megan, Natalie's best friend. The only person who might know where Natalie was. Natalie, his ordinary ex-wife, whom he had discarded for not being on his level. An intense wave of extreme shame burned Jason's face. Contacting Megan was the lowest option imaginable. It was the absolute admission of defeat. It was proof that he had failed spectacularly. But on the other hand, Natalie was the only person in the world who had ever given him everything unconditionally. He remembered Natalie's last words in the restaurant, "You will regret this." The regret was here now, not as a simple feeling of guilt, but as a concrete, suffocating reality in the form of a verdict of blindness and paralysis. He stared at Megan's name on the screen. His hand shook violently from the illness and the despair. He had to do it. He had no other choice. The bravado Jason had flaunted, the one he had used to humiliate Natalie, and as a shield of arrogance at the hospital, was now the size of a grain of dust. He stared at the screen for almost an hour, his hand, now suffering from a severe, hard-to-control tremor, raised and lowered several times to press the call button. Every time he tried to press it, he seemed to hear Sylvia's cynical laughter and his own arrogant voice echoing in his ears. We are no longer on the same level. The shame burned his throat like stomach acid. Contacting Megan was raising the white flag. It was admitting that Natalie, the ordinary woman he abandoned, was his last hope. As he hesitated, his left eye throbbed again. The blurry shadow on the edge of his vision seemed to grow thicker. The fear of blindness was far more acute than his shame. He took a sharp breath and killed his pride. He pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Just when Jason thought Megan wouldn't answer the call connected, there was no hello, just an icy silence. Hello, Jason said with a hoarse voice. Hello, Megan. A sarcastic sigh echoed from the other end. Look at that. The esteemed Dr. Jason. You still had my number saved. Megan's voice was so cutting and full of venom that it chipped away at Jason's remaining courage. Megan, I'm sorry to bother you so late. You're sorry, Megan laughed. A totally humorless laugh. It's been over a year since you threw my best friend away like trash, and now you call to say you're sorry. Don't you think it's a little late? No, that's not it. Jason rubbed his sweaty face. I just wanted to ask how Natalie is doing. Megan's laughter ceased instantly. After a moment of silence, a very dangerous voice came through. What you're asking about, Natalie? After a year of not caring whether she was dead or alive, are you asking seriously, or has your doctor brain stopped working, Megan, please? Jason pleaded. His arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by palpable desperation. I really need to speak to her. It's a matter of life and death. Life and death, Megan mocked. Life and death. What's wrong with you? Did you run out of money? Do you want to ask her to fund another fellowship for you? Oh wait, I know. You're sick. Karma finally caught up with you, Jason. Megan's accurate guess felt like a slap. Jason remained silent, unable to refute it. I knew it, Megan yelled, her voice rising. You're in trouble, aren't you? I knew it. You and your mother are parasites. You thought Natalie was an ATM you could tap into whenever you needed cash. Isn't that right, Megan? Please just listen to me. Jason was beginning to panic. I don't want to hear anything, Megan cut him off. Listen to me clearly, Jason. Natalie is happy. She rebuilt her life from the foundation that you destroyed. She forgot about parasites like you and your mother. Don't you dare bother her again, and do not ever contact me. Click. The call disconnected. Jason stared at his phone, screen, stunned. Megan, wait. He tried calling back. The number went straight to voicemail. Megan had blocked him. Jason threw his phone onto the sofa. He paced back and forth in his dark living room, utterly desperate. Megan was his only avenue, and that avenue had just slammed shut. Sylvia came out of her room, her face puffy from crying. What happened, Jason? Did you get a loan? Shut up, Mom, Jason retorted. All of this is your fault, too. If you hadn't pressured me, maybe Natalie would have forgiven me. Why is it my fault? You wanted to. You said you were embarrassed of her, Sylvia fired back. Their argument was pointless. Jason returned to his phone. He couldn't call, but he could send a text. With hands shaking violently from a combination of illness and despair, he typed a brief message. Megan, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But please, it really is life or death. I have a rare disease. I'm going to go blind and be paralyzed. I just need to know if Natalie can help me. Please. He pressed send. The message delivered, but there was no response. Minutes turned into an hour. His hope extinguished. Megan truly didn't care. And why should she? Jason threw his phone away again. It was over. His life was over. But an hour later, a text notification chimed. It was from Megan. Jason's heart pounded, and he rushed to open it. It wasn't an address, nor was it Natalie's phone number. It was just a cold reply. Do you think Natalie is still the same woman? The ordinary Natalie you could step on whenever you pleased? Do you think she'll hear you're sick and cry out of pity hilarious? Jason deflated. Megan was just mocking him. But beneath that text was another message. The Natalie of today is too busy running her new foundation to remember the garbage from her past. If you really need help, look it up yourself. Don't be a coward. The message ended there. But Jason got stuck on one word, foundation. What foundation Natalie had? A foundation that ordinary. Natalie were Megan's words a trap or just another taunt? With shaking hands, he rushed to grab his laptop off the coffee table. With his left eye blurry, he had to bring his face close to the screen. He opened a search engine. What should he type? Natalie Foundation, he typed. The first result made his blood run cold. It wasn't a social media account or a personal blog. It was a highly professional website, the Natalie Foundation. Jason's heart felt like it stopped. He clicked the link. A sleek, elegantly designed homepage loaded. On the front page was a massive photograph of a woman. It was Natalie, but it wasn't the Natalie he knew. The Natalie in the photo wore a sharp, tailored navy blue blazer. Her hair was cut in a sleek, immaculate bob. She stood in front of a modern high-rise building, smiling slightly at the camera. Her smile was no longer the soft, submissive smile of a dutiful wife. It was the smile of a leader, dignified, confident, and formidable. On the wall of the building lobby behind her was a large silver plaque that read, "The Natalie Foundation, passing on the good building the future." Jason scrolled down the page with trembling hands. He read the About Us section. Founded by Natalie Lopes, author of the best-selling autobiography Rising from the Ashes, the Natalie Foundation is a non-profit organization dedicated to helping those fighting to move forward. Author of a bestseller, when did Natalie write a book? He kept reading. He reached the Our Core Programs section. There were several, and his eyes locked onto the flagship program, the Beacon of Knowledge Grant, full scholarships and emergency surgical funding for outstanding medical students and professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds. The laptop nearly slipped off his lap. Jason felt a massive lump in his throat. This was impossible. It had to be a joke, a nightmare. His ex-wife Natalie, whom he had insulted for not being on his level, was now the founder of a massive foundation dedicated specifically to funding the education and emergency surgeries of medical professionals. The irony was so painful, so exquisitely cruel that Jason felt physically nauseous. He frantically searched for news articles about Natalie. He found dozens. Interviews in business magazines, appearances on national morning talk shows. Natalie's face was everywhere. Natalie Lopes turning pain into action. Armed with millions in book royalties, the Natalie Foundation is set to shape the future of medicine. Jason stared at the laptop screen, and then at the pile of collection letters on his desk. He grabbed his left eye, which was beginning to ache fiercely. Megan was right. The Natalie of today was not the Natalie of the past. She was someone entirely out of his reach. She was the one person holding the key to all his problems, and she was the person he had hurt the most in this world. The laptop screen remained on, casting a cold blue light into the dark penthouse living room. Natalie's face, smiling with dignity from the Foundation's website, was a harsher slap in the face than Dr. Peterson's diagnosis. Jason didn't sleep all night. He just sat there paralyzed. One hand gripped his MRI results, the other shook uncontrollably. His left eye was now highly uncomfortable. His field of vision was physically narrowing. The disease was not giving him time to think. The irony of the situation was too cruel, too perfectly engineered. In her bedroom, Sylvia no longer cried. She was just completely silent. The shock she had experienced was so profound her brain could no longer process reality. Her country club circle had stopped inviting her out. Her supplemental credit cards had been frozen by the bank. She was trapped just like Jason. Jason knew he had no other option. Shame, pride, arrogance, none of it meant anything if he went blind and ended up paralyzed. He had to go see Natalie. He had to strip away the absolute last shred of his ego. The first problem emerged: money. He didn't have a single dollar. All his credit cards were maxed out. He looked at the keys to his Mercedes on the table. Useless. The bank held the title. He glanced at the luxury watch on his wrist. It was the only liquid asset he had left, and he had bought it on an installment plan using a credit card. He took it off. "Damn it," he whispered. He threw on a coat to cover his sleepwear and rushed out. He headed to a pawn shop near downtown, a place he would have previously looked at with utter disdain. "Yes, doctor." Jason had to stand in line with people pawning fake gold jewelry. The luxury watch was appraised at an insultingly low price. He was left with barely enough for a taxi ride to the Foundation's address and one cheap meal. The ride to the financial district, where the Natalie Foundation was headquartered, felt like a walk to the gallows. Accustomed to driving his Mercedes with absolute arrogance, he was now sitting in the back of a cramped cab that smelled of cheap air freshener. He looked out the window at the downtown skyscrapers he had once considered his personal playground. The car stopped in front of a modern, imposing glass office building. The glass walls towered into the sky. The marble lobby gleamed beyond elegant revolving doors. A massive silver plaque shone under the morning sun, the Natalie Foundation. Jason paid the cab with what little cash he had left. He stood shivering on the sidewalk. This was real. It wasn't just a website, it was a small empire. He straightened his wrinkled coat. He felt like a beggar. With heavy steps, he pushed through the glass doors. The lobby of the Foundation was entirely different from what he had imagined. It wasn't some tiny, dusty NGO office. The place looked more like the lobby of a five-star hotel, bustling, highly professional, and full of positive energy. Several young people in crisp attire, likely scholarship recipients, walked briskly, holding stacks of files. The walls were decorated with large framed photos. Natalie shaking hands with a university dean, Natalie inaugurating a rural clinic, Natalie smiling, surrounded by medical students looking at her with pure admiration. Jason's heart shrank. All of this. Natalie had built all of this from the pain he had caused her. He cautiously approached the reception desk made of solid, expensive mahogany. A polite young woman smiled at him immediately. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you? I have an appointment." Jason's chest tightened. The receptionist smiled. A professional smile that now felt like a steel shield. "I'm very sorry, sir. Without a prior appointment, I cannot interrupt the executive meetings. If you'd like to leave a message or—" "I told you it's a life or death emergency," Jason shouted, his voice turning desperate. His hands began to shake violently, and he had to jam them into his coat pockets. Several people in the lobby turned to look. The receptionist looked a bit nervous. Her hand hovered over the phone to call security. "What is this commotion?" A calm, deep, and very familiar voice echoed from the direction of a private elevator in the corner of the lobby. Jason froze. He recognized that voice. He turned slowly. Standing there upright and imposing in an expensive, perfectly tailored charcoal suit was Attorney Gallagher, Natalie's lawyer. His face was still calm, but the gaze behind his expensive glasses was now much sharper. He no longer looked like a small-time lawyer defending an oppressed wife. He looked like a top-tier corporate legal counsel. Attorney Gallagher looked at Jason. There was no surprise on his face, only a cold, calculating observation. He walked over. "Mr. Jason, I didn't expect we would meet again. And certainly not here." Jason swallowed hard. His shame was now heavily mixed with fear. "Attorney Gallagher, do you still remember me?" Attorney Gallagher smiled faintly. "Oh, I never forget a potential client who could have earned me $485,000. And I certainly never forget the man who passed up that opportunity." He glanced at the receptionist. "It's fine, Haley. I will handle this gentleman." Attorney Gallagher gestured for Jason to follow him to a more private area, a waiting lounge furnished with plush leather sofas. Jason sat on the edge of the sofa, his body rigid, so Attorney Gallagher began sitting comfortably across from him and crossing his legs. "What brings Mr. Jason here after more than a year? Don't tell me you've changed your mind about the $485,000 and want to pay it." No, Jason interrupted quickly. "It's not that. I'm sick, Mr. Gallagher. I'm critically ill." "I know," Attorney Gallagher replied dryly. Jason's jaw dropped. "How do you know?" "Miss Lopes's friend, Miss Megan, called her last night after receiving your text message. She told her everything about the HSCT and your need for $1.5 million. Miss Lopes asked me to meet with you if you forced your way in here." Jason was stunned. So Megan had tipped her off. Natalie knew he was coming. All of this was anticipated. He felt like a rat in a maze. "So where is Natalie?" Jason whispered hope, mixing with terror. She's going to help me, right? She still cares." Attorney Gallagher didn't answer. He just looked at Jason with an unreadable expression. Then he reached out to the coffee table between them and picked up one of the thick, glossy brochures neatly stacked there. It was the official pamphlet for the Natalie Foundation. Attorney Gallagher didn't say a word. He simply slid the brochure toward Jason. Jason's violently shaking hand picked up the brochure. He opened it. On the second page, the Foundation's vision and mission were clearly detailed, and on the third page was its flagship program, the Beacon of Knowledge Grant. Comprehensive educational funding and coverage for emergency surgical expenses for outstanding medical professionals. It was all right there in black and white. Jason looked up at Attorney Gallagher with pleading eyes. "Attorney, this means Natalie is going to help me, doesn't it?" Attorney Gallagher leaned back into the sofa. He stared at Jason for a long time before finally speaking, his voice calm and chilling. "It is true that Miss Lopes founded this organization to help people, but Mr. Jason, this program has a procedure. What procedure? I'll do whatever it takes." Attorney Gallagher smiled faintly. "Well then, go back to the reception desk." "Why?" Jason asked, confused. "To pick up an application form," Attorney Gallagher replied. "The medical assistance beneficiary application. You will need to fill it out completely. Attach a certificate of financial hardship issued by the Department of Transitional Assistance, a full statement of your outstanding debts, Dr. Peterson's official diagnosis, and of course, a letter of recommendation. Then our team will evaluate whether you meet the requirements." Jason's blood ran cold. Certificate of financial hardship. Dr. Jason having to go to a local welfare office to beg for a poverty certificate. Mr. Jason Attorney Gallagher continued, "You are not here as an ex-husband looking for pity. You are here, sir, as an applicant, a petitioner, just like dozens of other applicants. Now go and get the form." Jason stumbled out of the massive lobby of the Natalie Foundation. His body felt light and heavy at the same time as if his soul had been drained out of him. In his hand, he held a brochure and several pages of an application form that felt heavier than Dr. Peterson's medical verdict. Medical Assistance Beneficiary Application. Attached Certificate of Financial Hardship issued by the Department of Transitional Assistance. Those words danced before his increasingly blurry eyes. Yes, Dr. Jason, whose photograph had been featured in the hospital's internal medical journal, now had to beg for a poverty certificate at a municipal welfare office. It was a level of humiliation he could never have fathomed. Attorney Gallagher hadn't even walked him to the door. He let him leave alone, walking past the curious stares of the young staff who had seen him enter with the top lawyer and now watched him leave with an ashen face. He arrived back at his penthouse, which now felt like a luxury prison. Sylvia greeted him immediately at the door. "What happened, Jason? Did you see Natalie? She said she'll help you write. I'm sure she still loves you, honey." Jason didn't answer. He walked straight to the dining room and threw the application forms onto the marble table. "Read it," he whispered. Sylvia picked up the papers. Her eyes widened as she read the title of the form. "What is this? Why do you have to fill out a form? She's your ex-wife." Then her eyes fell on the list of requirements. Attached Certificate of Financial Hardship issued by the Department of Transitional Assistance. Sylvia's voice pitched up. "Natalie is insane. She wants to humiliate us. She wants to make us beg. She succeeded." Mom, Jason screamed, his voice cracking. He punched the wall next to him, but his fist was shaking so badly it felt weak. "She succeeded in turning me into a beggar. Do you think I have another choice? Huh? Do you want me to go blind? Do you want to push my wheelchair around this penthouse that the bank is going to foreclose on next month?" Sylvia fell silent. Her face was pale. Reality slammed into her with full force. "Grab your purse, Mom," Jason ordered coldly. "We are going to the welfare office right now." "But Jason, I'm embarrassed," Sylvia whined. "What embarrasses you more? Going to the welfare office or listening to the debt collectors bang on our door and evict you from this penthouse in front of all the women from your country club?" Sylvia had no rebuttal. Trembling, she got dressed. She purposefully put on oversized sunglasses and a face mask, praying no one would recognize her. The trip to the welfare office was the most humiliating experience of their lives. They couldn't use the Mercedes, which was behind on registration taxes. They had to take a cheap rideshare that dropped them off right at the chipped front doors of the municipal building. As soon as they walked in, everyone's eyes seemed to land on them. Caseworkers typing frantically, other citizens waiting in line to apply for food stamps and housing assistance. It was a wildly contrasting spectacle. Sylvia, clutching her fake designer bag, and Jason, the young doctor with a recognizable face, now sitting in cracked orange plastic waiting chairs. "Hey, isn't that Dr. Jason from the Gold Coast area?" a clerk whispered to a coworker. "Yeah, what's he doing here? This is the Social Services Division." Jason simply lowered his head, gripping his trembling hands tightly over his knees. Sylvia pretended to be busy on her phone, even though the screen was completely black. When their number was called, Jason approached the counter with heavy steps. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" I need to request a certificate of financial hardship," Jason said, his voice barely audible. The clerk looked up in surprise. "Excuse me, sir. For who? For me, Jason." The clerk looked him up and down. "Your doctor?" "Jason Wright, the one with the penthouse. Sorry, but you don't seem to qualify." "I am sick," Jason yelled, his voice echoing. "I am critically ill. I need a surgery that costs $1.5 million. I am no longer working. I am ruined. I have no money. Is that clear? Just give me the form." The entire office fell dead silent. Every single pair of eyes was glued to Jason. Sylvia wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. This humiliation was worse than death. After a grueling process that felt like an eternity filled with suspicious glares and cutting whispers, that precious piece of paper was finally in Jason's hands, proof of indigence. The municipal stamp on the paper felt like a branding iron burning the palm of his hand. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk under a dim reading lamp and filled out page by page the application for the Natalie Foundation. Name of applicant Jason, profession surgeon inactive. He reached the debt profile section. He wrote everything down, one by one, swallowing his pride with every stroke of the pen. Penthouse mortgage, $1 million. Mercedes-Benz Auto Loan $150,000. Credit card A $25,000. Credit card B $25,000. Personal bank loan C $15,000. The total debt amounted to a staggering $1.2 million. In the owned assets section, he wrote one word, none. He attached the proof of indigence copies of all his collection letters and Dr. Peterson's medical diagnosis. It was a perfect dossier of his complete bankruptcy and failure. The next morning, he returned to the foundation building. This time, his appearance was even more disheveled. He hadn't shaved, and his eyes were bloodshot. He handed the thick file to the receptionist Haley, who received it with the exact same professional smile. "Yes, sir, the file has been received. Our review board will process it. Please wait." Jason waited in the lobby. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. He watched people walk by. He watched bright-eyed medical students, probably funded by Natalie, walking with purpose. Just when he thought they were going to tell him to get lost, Attorney Gallagher emerged from the elevator. "Mr. Jason, Miss Lopes will see you now." Jason's heart seemed to stop. It was time to follow Attorney Gallagher like a lamb to the slaughter. They rode the private elevator up to the top floor, the executive penthouse. The elevator doors opened directly into an incredibly spacious corner office. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a 180-degree view of the Boston Harbor. In the center of the room, behind a massive, immaculate mahogany desk, sat Natalie. Jason held his breath. The Natalie he saw now was not the one from the photos. She was far more imposing. Her hair was pulled up into a sleek, modern chignon. She wore an elegant, emerald green silk blouse. Her makeup was subtle yet authoritative. She was reading something on her computer screen. She didn't look up immediately when Jason and Attorney Gallagher walked in. "Miss Lopes, Mr. Jason is here," Attorney Gallagher said quietly. Natalie finished reading, then slowly raised her head. Her eyes were what had changed the most. Before, they were always filled with love and adoration. Now they were cold, tranquil, and as sharp as a bird of praise. There was no love, no hatred. Only pure calculation. "Mr. Jason, sit down," Natalie said. Her voice was entirely flat. Not Jason, but Mr. Jason. Jason sat in a stiff chair across from Natalie's desk. He felt like a defendant on trial. Attorney Gallagher stood silently in the corner of the room. "We have reviewed your application," Natalie began. Her tone was as casual as if she were discussing the weather. She picked up the MRI results he had submitted. "The HSCT diagnosis is valid and progressive. Requirement of funds $1.5 million. We verified the cost with the hospital in Singapore. The figure is accurate." Natalie flipped to the next page. "And your debt profile. A total of $1.2 million. Very impressive. You managed to squander that much money in barely a year." Jason flushed with deep shame. "Natalie." Jason couldn't hold it in anymore. He had to beg. "Natalie, I messed up. I was blind. Natalie, I was arrogant." Natalie slightly raised her hand, her palm facing Jason. A tiny gesture with immense power that silenced Jason instantly. "Mr. Jason," she said, her voice remaining perfectly flat, "I am not interested in your apologies. That is your personal matter and holds absolutely no value in this business proposal." "Business," Jason opened his mouth. "Of course. This foundation is a legal corporate entity. $1.5 million is a massive investment to save one life. My board has to evaluate if the asset being saved is worth the capital cost." Jason felt a physical stab to his chest. "Asset. You consider me an asset?" "Of course. You are a highly trained surgeon. You possess a skill. It would be a pity for you to go blind or paralyzed." Natalie stared at him blankly. "But you have a remarkably poor track record of managing investments that others have provided for you." That sentence pierced straight into Jason's core. Natalie was referring to the cost of his 5 years of medical school tuition. Jason lowered his head. He was completely, utterly defeated. "So, Natalie, what is your decision? Are you going to reject me?" Natalie leaned back in her chair. She stared at Jason for a long time. The silence in the room was suffocatingly heavy. "No, your application has been approved." Jason let out a massive gasp. Tears of sheer relief nearly burst from his eyes. "Natalie, thank you. Thank you. I promise I am not finished," Natalie cut in. Her voice remained icy. "The foundation will cover the full $1.5 million for your surgery in Singapore." "Oh my God. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you." And Natalie continued as if Jason hadn't spoken at all. The foundation will also absorb all of your consumer debt, the $1.2 million. Jason's jaw dropped. What, Natalie, you're going to pay off my car, the mortgage on my penthouse. Correct. I do not want my assets being harassed by debt collectors while they recover. Jason couldn't believe it. This was far beyond anything he had dared to hope for. Natalie, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything because this is not a gift, Natalie said. It is not charity nor is it compassion. Natalie stood up and walked toward the massive glass window looking down at the city below. It is a grant contract, an employment contract. Jason tensed up. Employment contract. Natalie turned around, her eyes locked onto Jason's. There was not a single trace of affection in them. It was purely business. The Natalie Foundation will invest a total of $2.7 million in you. After you fully recover, and you will recover, you will no longer be the arrogant, free Dr. Jason. You will be an asset owned by the Natalie Foundation. Jason stared at Natalie, incredulous. An asset, owned by the Foundation. Exactly. Natalie walked back and sat in her chair as if closing a routine merger. She gestured to Attorney Gallagher. Attorney Gallagher stepped forward and placed a thick black leather binder on the desk in front of Jason. Read it, Mr. Jason, Attorney Gallagher said. That is your employment contract. Jason's trembling hand opened the binder. Inside was not just one page, but dozens of pages of dense legal jargon, including a debt assignment agreement and an exclusivity contract. Natalie began to explain, her voice devoid of emotion, reading it like a financial report. First, the foundation will liquidate the entirety of your $2.7 million debt within 24 hours, $1.5 million for your surgery, and $1.2 million to pay off your mortgage, car loan, and all credit cards. Jason swallowed hard. Second, all physical assets tied to those debts, the penthouse in the Seaport District and the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, will be seized by the foundation as collateral. Attorney Gallagher's team will handle the eviction tomorrow morning. You and your mother have until tonight to pack your bags. Jason gasped. Eviction, but where will I live? Third, the foundation will provide you with basic lodging for the duration of the contract, a room in the staff quarters of our assigned clinic. Fourth, this contract is legally binding. You are required to dedicate your medical career entirely under the auspices of the Natalie Foundation. Considering the foundation's total investment in you is $2.7 million, and the standard salary for a physician at our clinic is $4,000 a month, Natalie picked up a calculator on her desk and typed in silence. You will be under an exclusive dedication contract with us for 28 years. 28 years, Jason deflated. It was a life sentence. However, Natalie continued as if reading his mind, if you perform exceptionally well, our foundation does have an early release program for outstanding assets. If you can demonstrate unparalleled dedication and service in a remote area, your contract may be reviewed. Remote area, Jason whispered. He certainly didn't think she would assign him to a luxury hospital in Boston. No, Mr. Jason. Natalie smiled faintly. It was the first smile Jason had seen from her, and it was the most terrifying. You will be assigned to our primary service clinic in an isolated rural town deep in the Appalachian Mountains, an 8-hour drive from any major city. Jason lowered his head. He had no other choice. Sign a 8-year contract in an Appalachian village, or go blind, become paralyzed, and be hunted by debt collectors for the rest of his short life. I'll sign it, Jason whispered. A wise choice, Natalie said. She handed him an expensive fountain pen. Jason took the pen. His hand shook violently, half from the disease, half because his fate had just been permanently sealed. He signed every single page Attorney Gallagher pointed to. Good, Natalie said the moment the final signature was completed. Attorney Gallagher will take you to the bank to open a new account under the foundation's control, and he will arrange your departure for Singapore the day after tomorrow. Work hard, Dr. Jason. Natalie turned her attention back to her computer screen, completely ignoring Jason, signaling that the meeting was over and that as far as she was concerned, Jason was no longer in the room. 2 days later, Attorney Gallagher's team arrived at the Seaport penthouse. Sylvia, who delusionally believed Natalie would change her mind and let them stay, cried hysterically. You are evil. How can you do this? This is our home. Where are we supposed to live? Attorney Gallagher simply presented a valid foreclosure and seizure order. I'm sorry, ma'am. This mortgage was paid off in full by the foundation. As per the signed contract, this asset is now the property of the foundation. You have exactly 1 hour to collect your personal belongings. The once arrogant Sylvia was forced to violently shove her clothes into a suitcase while listening to the whispers and gossip of the wealthy penthouse neighbors. Jason's Mercedes was towed directly out of the underground parking garage. Sylvia was transported via a cheap taxi to a small, stuffy rented apartment on the grim outskirts of the city. The foundation had paid for her first 3 months of rent. After that, she would have to fend entirely for herself. Meanwhile, Jason underwent the HSCT surgery in Singapore. The procedure was a success. The stem cell technology managed to effectively reboot his immune system. His recovery process was long, painful, and incredibly lonely. There was no Sylvia to baby him, no surgical colleagues dropping by with gifts, only a private nurse hired by the foundation. 2 months later, Jason returned to the United States. He was fully recovered. His hands no longer shook. His vision was perfectly clear again, but he was no longer a free man. He was met at the airport by a foundation representative. He was handed a simple set of medical scrubs, embroidered with the logo of the Natalie Foundation, and was immediately escorted to a Greyhound bus terminal. After an 8-hour ride on a hot standard bus, followed by a 2-hour drive in an old pickup truck up winding dirt mountain roads, he finally arrived at his assigned clinic. It was a simple white-paneled building sitting in the middle of a deeply isolated Appalachian town surrounded by dense forests. There was no central air conditioning, just ceiling fans. There was no high-tech robotic surgery equipment, just a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, and basic essential medications. The former ace of luxury private surgery, Dr. Jason, now had to treat chronic coughs, severe colds, stomach bugs, and assist in basic rural births with minimal equipment. In the beginning, he felt furious, deeply resentful, and humiliated, but he had absolutely no choice. Every single day, he worked under the strict supervision of the clinic's senior director. Back in Boston, Sylvia was suffering. The money for the 3 months of rent ran out quickly. She was forced to sell off her few remaining authentic designer bags. Yes, the very same woman who had once humiliated Natalie for her ordinary job now had to work as a dishwasher in a greasy local diner, scrubbing plates just to survive. Every time she saw Natalie's face on the television news broadcast as a prominent philanthropist, Sylvia could only cry into the sink of her small rented apartment, filled with infinite regret. 6 months passed and Jason began to adapt. Stripped of his ego and his fake lifestyle, he started to find something he had severely lacked in his life: sincerity. He saw the rugged patients of the mountain town, who looked at him with profound gratitude just for checking their vitals. He helped set a young boy's broken arm using only basic splinting tools. He realized slowly but surely that the true meaning of being a doctor wasn't the luxury, the penthouses, or the social status. It was the service. One afternoon, the loud chopping sound of helicopter blades echoed over the village, startling the residents as a sleek chopper landed in the open field near the clinic. Jason, who was busy stitching up a local farmer's deep laceration, looked up through the clinic window. Stepping out of the helicopter was Natalie, accompanied by Attorney Gallagher. She had come for a routine site inspection. Natalie, dressed in an impeccable linen button-down, walked into the clinic. She saw Jason, who was now noticeably tanned from the mountain sun. His foundation-issued scrubs were drenched in sweat. Natalie didn't greet him personally right away. She meticulously checked the medical inventory logs and the patient registry books. Finally, she stopped in front of Jason, who was now consoling a little girl crying from a vaccine injection. Jason's hand, which had once trembled from disease and arrogance, was now incredibly steady and gentle as he patted the child's back. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Jason bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. "Good afternoon, Miss Lopes. The daily patient reports are on the clinic director's desk." Natalie looked at him for a long time. There was no anger left in her eyes, only the evaluating gaze of a leader looking at an employee. "Good work, Dr. Jason. Keep it up. You have 27.5 years left." Natalie turned on her heel and walked back out toward her waiting helicopter. Jason watched through the window as the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the clouds. He sighed deeply. He truly wasn't on Natalie's level. Natalie was in the sky and he was firmly planted in the dirt. Natalie had won flawlessly. She hadn't just gotten her money back. She hadn't just gotten revenge. She had taken Jason's entire life, systematically dismantled it, and then rebuilt it into her own vision, not as an arrogant, cheating husband, but as a dedicated, humble doctor. Natalie had managed to pass on the good in the most painful yet profoundly just way possible. A brief but powerful lesson: arrogance is a debt with the highest possible interest rate. It will always be collected when we are least prepared to pay it. Sincerity, on the other hand, is the only investment that truly lasts.